Hello and welcome to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen, and I'm joined today by our president, Father Boquet. Welcome to the podcast, Father.
Great, Colleen, to be with you once again.
It's great to have you here, Father, and we're going to be unpacking all of the executive orders that Trump has been signing recently that relate to life and family issues. And Father, we're filming this Wednesday afternoon, hoping to get this out tomorrow. I'm sure that more things will have developed between when we're filming now and what comes out tomorrow. So
Absolutely.
we're just going to do our best with what we have right now.
Very good,
So,
very good.
I know that you're right in the middle of writing an article right now for your Spirit and Life column next week on this topic.
Correct.
So let's just dive in first with the Mexico City policy, because that's the first one you addressed in your column, and that's one that pertains very directly to our mission. So can you explain to our listeners what that is and why Trump reinstating it is a big thing?
So basically what the Mexico City policy does, Colleen, is it takes the Hyde Amendment. So now we're back to an amendment, that was passed during the Reagan era, so
Okay.
back in the mid-1980s, where basically saying that we cannot use funding, taxpayer funding, to fund abortion internationally. That's what the Mexico City policy now does. It takes it to the level where you cannot use the taxpayer funding to advocate, to support, to fund abortion internationally.
Okay.
So this is something that's very important, So and you've seen since that era, since the Reagan era, each president taking a different approach to it. Obviously, most cases, or in every case, the Republican has upheld the Mexico City policy, has been faithful to the Hyde Amendment, and at the same time, we've seen the Democrat presidents, each one since the Reagan era, actually rescind the Mexico City policy.
So they're basically two different. So the Hyde Amendment says that taxpayer dollars can't go towards abortion at all.
Correct.
And then the Mexico City policy takes the intent of the Hyde Amendment and specifically applies it to international aid.
Funding. Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. So Trump reinstating it basically means, so if the Hyde Amendment would have been something that was passed by Congress though, right? So what is the president's role in relation to the Hyde Amendment?
So with regard to the Hyde Amendment, because it is a congressional, bill that's been passed, signed into law, it is to be followed, in the way the United States, in its policies and programs. But the Mexico City policy is just that. It's a policy. It's not a congressional bill or signed into law. It's basically has been used as an executive order, and that's why you see the changes so often in the changing of a president. So you might have 8 years. So under the Bush era, and presidency, you had 8 years, and so each under Obama, under Clinton, under obviously under Biden, which was only 4 years. But the reality is that's how it moves with the wind. And this is a real problem, and it's something that that I'm addressing in my column. This is a moment to change the conversation, to really look at the Mexico City policy from being a policy that changes with the changing of a presidency and the position of a president on this issue, to really move it in legislation and let it become not only a bill but signed into law.
I guess what I'm confused about is if there's a bill saying that taxpayer funding can't go towards abortion, what do these executive orders do? Does it mean that despite the Hyde Amendment, taxpayer dollars are going towards abortion?
No, the Hyde Amendment is basically saying that you cannot use funds, taxpayer funds, to support abortion. All right, and so basically used within the United States.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
And then the Mexico City policy
So
then
it
takes
that same language
and applies it worldwide.
Right. That's my understanding
Okay.
of how this is applied. So that's why the Mexico City policy, is not governed by a legislative act or by a law. So that's what makes it so fluid. And so what we're going to really push for, and we've been doing this now for years, not myself alone, pro-life movement itself has been asking Congress to pick up this language. And so that's why what you'll see in President Trump's executive orders is, first of all, he addresses the issue of the Hyde Amendment. Then he also addresses Mexico City policy, and then he addresses through another executive order how to take that policy in the sense of how funding needs to be defunded from many of the government agencies. And I know we're going to talk about that.
Yeah. So how does his executive order regarding the Mexico City policy compare to the one that he issued in his first term in 2017?
So in his first term in 2017, whenever he took and basically re-implemented, instated the Mexico City policy. What he did is he took it and moved it much further. And what he did there is he extended its influence. So not only was USAID or maybe the United Nations Population Fund, the various ways or agencies that are receiving funding from the federal government to be able to act on behalf of the federal government in its work, its
Mhm.
programs. So what he did is he said, okay, not only are we not going to send money directly, to people that are advocating for abortion, promoting abortion, actually performing abortions,
Mhm.
or any type of entity, we're now going to look at any agency that maybe is trying to fly under the radar, that may not be directly involved, but they themselves are funding. So
Mhm.
they're receiving funds from the federal government of the United States, and though they themselves may not be with their own hand directly in the act, but they're giving that money, giving grants out to other people who are actually performing the act.
Okay.
So he took that and he moved the conversation. Now, in his first term as president, he obviously, himself being new and even his own different leaders within the various cabinet and those over the various offices of the federal government that he himself appointed would admit it was so infiltrated, it was so tentacled into so many areas
Mhm.
that this was just something hard to unravel. In his second term, he obviously comes in much more knowledgeable, much more experience, having gone through the difficulties in the first presidency. So he just comes right out the gate and he knows exactly. So by his second executive order, he does the same thing. He charges the Department of Justice, he
Mhm.
charges the Secretary of State, Department of Justice, Secretary of State to be able to, and other agents working with the Secretary of State's
Mhm.
office to pause, any granting,
Mhm.
to look at any agency that's receiving funding, anyone that's been promised funding, and to evaluate them based upon the executive order, based upon what the Mexico City policy states,
Mhm.
based upon what the Hyde Amendment, already affirms, and to make sure that they all in line.
So
And
any grants that are being issued by the United States
correct,
can't be going to organizations that provide abortions or to organizations that then use that money to give grants to
correct,
organizations that fund
correct,
abortions.
exactly.
So they can't be
Or
cutouts.
fund, or perform, or advocate, or any way that of that manner. So
Interesting.
this is very important because in the first presidency,
Mhm.
right after he reinstated the Mexico City policy, what I gave a number of examples here before,
Mhm.
where I used Puerto Rico as an example because this happened within a very few short days,
Mhm.
after he reinstated it, and that was an agent, a group that was working in Puerto Rico performing abortions. And basically, once that funding ceased, they just, shuttered their doors because the funding is gone.
Yeah.
So these things make a huge difference. So it shows that, that once these acts are in full force,
Mhm.
now imagine once they're evaluated. So if the Department of the Secretary of State is really looking at all of these, or those that are working with the Secretary of State's office and evaluating and,
Mhm.
and really assessing these various groups that receive grants,
Mhm.
funding. And so, as we know in the news right now, a little confusion on this issue because we've seen where people saying, well, now they just rescinded, that executive order, which is false. And you just did a little research on it by looking up. So you want to share with our
I'm trying to remember exactly. I was reading what Carolyn Levitt said, the press secretary, and it basically sounded like the freeze is still in effect, but they're like rewording the memo or something like that. So they're still like holding back the funding until they can audit basically or evaluate, figure out where it's going.
right,
But it did sound like the freeze was still in effect, but then it's not affecting programs that specifically help Americans because people are
right.
saying things like Medicare and Medicaid are affected, and my understanding is they're not.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. There's so many things that could
Hmm.
be, tied to this, and that's what it's
Yeah.
going to take. Why? And there could be some truth in some of the things that you just mentioned. That we
Hmm.
again, that's the things they have to look
Yeah.
into.
Well, and it's money going to anything, not just money pertaining to abortion. Like,
Correct.
it sounded
Oh,
like
yes,
he just put a
absolutely.
freeze on basically all international aid to
Well,
reevaluate and say, "Okay, where is this going? Why are we funding it?
right.
Is this in line with the president's goals?"
Right,
And
exactly. But also in line with the Mexico City policy.
mhm.
So that's
Well,
one area of
that's
it.
where
So
I
it's
was saying the
exactly, yeah,
president's goals.
exactly.
Like, that is clearly one of his
Very
goals now.
important because it's really not to say the first time this has happened, but a very strong intent,
Mhm.
and and to back it with action is something that we're very grateful for. And I will say on the international front, our
Mhm.
international team of leaders hearing this news was excited
Yeah.
because we see firsthand on the ground the consequence when we don't adhere to our own law,
Mhm.
in the sense of the Hyde Amendment, when we don't follow, the very policies that flow from the federal government, in this case, the
Mhm.
Mexico City policy, once it's reinstated, this is what needs to be followed.
If our missionaries hear of things that are closing, like clinics that are closing or
Hmm.
anything like that, I would love to hear about it. And because
Absolutely.
we could talk about it here on the podcast, we could put it on Twitter. Because I'd love to have like real life examples of what happens when the
Right.
US stops funding these groups that are promoting abortion abroad.
Exactly, and also just we're going to be reaching out, not to play our hand, but it would make perfect sense for also our international team who knows the organizations. We
Hmm.
know who's out there, and I can name several of them, and because I've been in many of these countries, and I
Hmm.
see my with my own eyes where USAID, which, as you just said, there are many things that happen on behalf of the federal government, on behalf of the American people, on international fronts that are very good things.
Hmm.
There are very good programs that are not tied to immoral acts or to immoral
Hmm.
positions or ideologies. And these things, we need to continue those, obviously, and keep advocating for those good things that we do as a country. We're very charitable, we're very generous, we support many programs around the world that are admirable. And so, but there are many things we do that are not admirable, and many things that we do that harm people and harm families. And that's what's so good about this, is because now we're taking a look at it. We're going to expose it, turn the thing over and look at it, and assess it. How does this advocate for the principles that the president is wanting in his presidency? How do they adhere to our own laws and our own positions as a country? And what are they actually doing? And why are we doing that? And so it's something that from our people on the ground appreciate, because
Hmm.
we know that the millions upon millions of dollars. And one thing that I'm still doing a little research on with Dr. Brian Close, is that looking at International Planned Parenthood Federation,
Hmm.
which again, the Planned Parenthood Federation of America is an affiliate of, but the
Yes.
majority of the monies that support their affiliates around the world
Hmm.
really do come from the United States.
So that was one thing that was going to be my next question, and kind of moving us towards also discussing the Hyde Amendment is Planned Parenthood. I know that tax dollars can't go towards abortion, but you were saying that the Mexico City policy was saying that money couldn't go towards organizations that were like promoting abortion.
Right.
But I also know that we fund, like you just said, International Planned Parenthood or Planned Parenthood. So how does that work out? Is it just that the tax dollars can't be used directly for abortions, but they can be used to promote
Right.
contraception?
Right.
Are we not allowed to fund Planned Parenthood at all now?
Right.
What's going
So
on?
there's much confusion that surrounds this, Colleen, and it's going to be very difficult to answer all your questions,
Mhm.
because the understanding is that Planned Parenthood, the International Planned Parenthood Federation, and Planned Parenthood Federation of America, obviously when you go on their website, they're going to go through a litany of things, that services they offer.
Mhm.
And even though we know that abortion is one of the main things that they do offer, you will see a litany of other things. So what
Mhm.
happens is, some will try to say that they will segment some of
Mhm.
their activity, and that they would be advocating for. Planned Parenthood advocates. Marie Stope International is one that actually does perform abortions
Mhm.
internationally and so forth. Hands are definitely, right in the middle of it. But the idea is Planned Parenthood's trying to, like many organizations, trying to segment where their grants go, their funding
Mhm.
goes. But everything is fungible in this situation, because,
Mhm.
and that's a podcast in and of itself.
Yeah.
But what happens is they're able to convince those agents or agencies that they are following the policies
Mhm.
of the American people. In this situation here, now that the Mexico City policy has been reinstated, and you have a president and his delegates digging and looking and assessing, it turns it over and makes you look at it and say,
Mhm.
okay, I'm not just going to look at your 990s. I want to look a little deeper than your 990s. I want to
Mhm.
look at what it is you're supporting, who you're supporting, what other groups are you supporting, and to make sure that you are adhering to what the policy says that now is what we will follow.
Mhm.
And so what Planned Parenthood does is it kind of dances on that edge, like many groups do. But once you bring it into the light, and you realize, and I'm going to give you an example here. So Dr. Bryan and I have been doing a little bit of research on this. So, in Dr. Bryan, who has been working in this for decades, statistician, looks at all these things. So we were
He
looking
has
at some numbers
everything on
yesterday,
all
and he
of the
follows all the
organizations,
990s and he
all
looks
those
them all up.
dojers.
He's got thousands of organizations that he can. Matter of fact, I wish he can be called by Doge, because he make a
Oh,
good advisor to them. But
he's
the
got it all
so
detailed
anybody maybe
already.
listening and can work with that. That'd be a great idea. But what we looked at since so for the last 30 years, So, Planned Parenthood of America, Federation of America, PPFA,
Hmm.
okay? So we're talking about the Planned Parenthood in the United States, from the taxpayers of the United States, has received nearly $17 billion
Hmm.
now in the last 30 years. 700 million roughly last year, all
Hmm.
right? And if we would be under the Biden administration, we would see that continue.
Hmm.
That's now coming to an end.
So yeah, we'll.
Potentially will come to an end. I haven't seen anything written yet, but that was definitely in the conversations before the election. So
Mhm.
we'll have to wait and see. But I think for our audience, just to understand, wrap your head, around, and basically in those 30 years total,
Mhm.
you're looking at 45 to 47 billion dollars that International Planned Parenthood Federation of America has received. Now
Mhm.
you look at that and you say, okay, what could we be doing with those funding,
Mhm.
to support moral things,
Yeah.
moral programs, and really helping women in need, helping families in need. And as you and I have had many conversations, we have many other agencies of the federal government, of the state governments, hospitals, clinics that provide many of the same services, so-called, that Planned Parenthood provides.
The STD testing, they don't do mammograms, but people
Right,
say they do.
right.
Those things that are good.
Right. Those can be found in other places and are found in other places. So this is the chance, really, I believe, under the Trump administration, which in its first term did expose,
Yeah.
to re-expose, to bring to bear, a very vile organization
Mhm.
that does nothing to promote, the very values that we hold up as a country,
Mhm.
family and life,
Yeah.
and so we need to really address it. That's just one
Yeah.
among many.
Yeah.
Right. So what's happening here, back to adherence to the Mexico City policy, makes this our government and its agencies look at who's getting the grants, what are they actually for, what are we actually funding, getting the agents that are receiving. I mean,
Mhm.
here at Human Life International, we have an annual audit, an outside audit that always comes in. So to look at what, make sure that we are adhering, to what we're supposed to be representing as a 501c3, and
Mhm.
making sure that we're being faithful to what the donors are giving to, and so
Mhm.
forth, so that everything stays transparent.
Yeah.
President Trump has been speaking about transparency.
He has.
Here is something that we need to be transparent about.
Mhm.
And if you have nothing to hide, then you have nothing to be worried about with a 90-day stopgap to reevaluate what you're receiving. And then you just got to show it. But if you've been doing something wrong and you're doing something that's against the very laws of the nation and against the very policies that this administration now is
Mhm.
advocating, then look, you need to cease and desist.
So obviously, the Mexico City policy relates specifically to abortion. But obviously, here at HLI, we're concerned about the handing out of free contraception in places around the world. Do you think there's a possibility that this spending freeze is also going to stop U.S. funding of free contraception in places like Malawi? I know that yesterday the press
Right,
secretary pointed out the $50 million that Doe's discovered was going to be sent to Gaza for condoms.
right.
And there's debate about what if that was actually going towards condoms. It doesn't matter. What does matter is that we have been funding
Correct.
contraception in other countries.
Right.
Do you think that that's a possibility that Trump will
Well,
stop
well,
that?
in the column, I'm gonna obviously, so many things are happening, and so many things are happening quickly, and because of challenges to the orders and so forth. I mean, many things are going back and forth. But what we see ultimately is the president of the United States and his administration being honest to what they said they would do. And they are evaluating and looking at what we as a country are supporting,
Mhm.
what we're advocating for, not only within the United States, but what are we doing abroad? What are our
Mhm.
policies? And you and I have had many conversations on this podcast, and you have had it with many others, Dr. Brian Close being one of them, on the National Security Study Memorandum 200.
You just went that was exactly what I was about to bring
So
up.
here's a document, and I'm actually calling out, not calling out in a bad way, the president, but asking him within the column to the president for us to finally rescind, to denounce and this document that runs through all of our state policies. So for our listeners, I'm sorry, you want to,
Oh, I was about to just say, to our listeners, if you were surprised by the $50 million going to condoms in Gaza, that's something that we have been funding contraception abroad since 1974 in the Kissinger report, NSSM
exactly,
200. And
exactly.
so, yeah.
It's part of a state policy. So I'm getting to what your question is. So if you look at the United Nations Population Fund,
Mhm.
so and that people are familiar with, so this is an agency that receives funding,
Mhm.
right, from the United States, And so by its very name, United Nations Population Fund, population, so it advocates, for the lowering of the population.
Mhm.
And so by all you got to do is go online, and I'm going to mention several things. I'm going to link everything up in the article so people can go and read, and you realize how many millions of dollars that we are spending. So to your point, is that's an agency that needs to be looked at. So
Mhm.
absolutely through the sexual and reproductive health policies,
Mhm.
i.e., contraception, abortion, sterilization, and now because of the Biden administration, what we saw was the tying together of the whole end of transgenderism. We
Mhm.
saw the whole issues that revolve around those that identify as, LBGT, and so forth and so on. So that's all connected.
Mhm.
So what you see in the way is the United States. So here you have the president of the United States and his administration, and obviously the Congress
Mhm.
and the Senate and the American people who voted, very, very strongly, for President Trump to say that, look, we're tired of what we're seeing here. The
Mhm.
assault against our children, the violation of our children, the experimentation on our children, the
Mhm.
assault on our families, challenging parental rights, all these various things. We're tired of it. And people have now spoken. And so what you're seeing in the executive orders, Colleen, is the president being true to what he said he would address and
Mhm.
what the American people have sent him to Washington to do. And
Yeah.
so by each one of those executive orders, you can almost see the overlap of them.
Mhm.
All right. So as he's signing the executive orders, those orders are reflecting how are we going to fund those agencies? Are we going to fund those agencies? So
Mhm.
by virtue of getting out of the World Health Organization is an example
Mhm.
of the administration saying we're not going to fund this organization. By dealing with the issues of gender ideology and transgender and issues that you're dealing with there, he, again, is just saying we're not going to support, the experimentation on our young people.
Yeah.
This is not going to happen. So it's all these challenges, and we know they're going to be challenged in the system.
Mhm.
But what he's doing is he's bringing everything to the surface
Yeah.
and making people look at it and
Yes.
saying, okay, and it's going to be ugly. It's
Mhm.
not going to be pretty. The challenges are going to be real. All the legacy media is going to do exactly what they've been doing all these many decades, all right, advocating for these progressive policies.
Mhm.
And so we should not be surprised by the push, but it's going to take perseverance. So I do believe that, we will evaluate some of the ways we approach sexual and reproductive health and
Mhm.
begin to identify. So, for example, his executive order on the issue of gender,
Yes. He had
very,
2.
very, very powerful.
So we had the one that said that there are 2 sexes,
Right,
basically. And then he did one yesterday ending surgeries for children.
right, right. So the first one,
Gender, quote unquote, gender affirming care
right, and
surgeries.
transitioning issues, exactly.
Yes.
And so in the first one, which I will link of it in the article,
Mhm.
and people can hopefully you're reading. People are reading
Well, I can
because
link all of these in the description as
which would
well
be
too.
great
Yeah.
because what it does is not only identify the fact that there are two, biological sexes, male
Mhm.
and female, but he also uses a very important term. And it's one that's really getting kind of lost because people are focusing in on the gender question,
Mhm.
but issue of conception.
Oh, I saw
So,
lots of pro-life groups talking about it, which I
right.
was very thankful for. It didn't actually even occur to me when I first read it, and then because I'm so used to that language.
Right, right.
But anyway, you can
But he
explain more.
does, but he
Yeah.
does. I mean, he mentions it very clearly, in the executive order, outlining all these various points, and
Mhm.
of which he identifies, that there's no, this fluidity issues. I mean, male and female at conception.
Yeah, and I believe it was a person who
Right,
at conception is
right,
male and person who's
right.
at
So
conception is female.
which again, you can imagine now what this is going to do.
Mhm.
It's going to raise this conversation. Now we're talking about, so if a person becomes male and female at the moment of conception, right? Right? So
Mhm.
we're dealing with a living human being,
Mhm.
right? Which now goes against all the narrative that that people have been, all the false science, all the people who claim that that life doesn't begin at the moment of fertilization and implantation and so forth and so on. He just shot all that down, and it's going to make people have a conversation on this.
They're a person. Personhood begins at conception,
Right,
which fertilization is the more
right,
proper, precise
correct.
term, but
That's right,
that's a whole story for another time.
correct.
So a person life begins at conception or fertilization and that they're male or female.
Exactly.
3 truths that
So
are
you're
very
dealing
basic.
with a life that must be respected from the moment of fertilization. So this now is going to get, and granted, there's going to be some confusion because some of the positions that the president has taken on some other issues.
Mhm,
So that in a sense we have to address those.
mhm,
Obviously nothing is completely clear, and perfect, but many good things are happening,
mhm,
and it's elevating the conversation. So when you have Vice President Vance speaking at the March for Life, when you have Senator Thune,
mhm.
speaking at the March for Life, and you
Have Has there ever been a March for Life where you have the president on video, the vice president in person, and then both majority
no,
leaders?
no, and I've been looking it up, and others been looking up, trying to. We've not seen, in the sense of the Speaker of the House.
Mhm,
We've not seen, obviously, the head of the Senate, in the sense of the leader of the Senate, majority leader, at the March for Life all at one time.
mhm,
So this is definitely something remarkable, and for me that speaks volume,
mhm.
tremendous volume.
Yeah.
So the president was present via a pre-recorded video
Mhm.
and a speech, was very, very good. Obviously, the vice president was present in person.
Yeah.
Speaker of the House, the majority leader for the Senate, and we also had Governor DeSantis there, and many other leaders there.
Mhm,
And this again is speaking of volume. The tenor has changed.
mhm.
In the sense of the narrative is now moved,
Yeah.
and so what's happening is it's awakening people. And so
Mhm,
this is a very important moment, Colleen, for the country, as it was with the overturning of Roe.
mhm,
We have a moment where we can make a difference and we can move this conversation. And I'm so grateful, to President Trump
mhm,
and his administration. One, as in the first administration, by one, looking at what we do domestically.
mhm,
How are we adhering, to the laws of our own nation, and how can we truly promote values that support life? And to hear the language from the vice president, which was repeated by the president in his recorded speech,
mhm.
speak about children and families and the right to life. And now we got to keep this conversation going.
Can we go through for our audience all of the things he's done that we can think of that related to life and family in the past week? So the first one would have been the Mexico City policy was a big
Right.
one. So
Correct.
taxpayer funding can't go to abortion worldwide. He's enforcing the Hyde Amendment within the US.
Correct.
Um,
Which means funding organizations that are
mhm.
that advocate for
And
abortion.
I
Right.
wanna talk about that in a moment, but so Mexico City policy, Hyde Amendment, he had the defining 2 genders, AKA really, better term, 2 sexes.
Male and
He
female.
had ending the, quote, unquote, "gender affirming care for children." He took down the abortion website. He spoke at the March for Life
Correct.
and then sent Vance there as well, or Vance
Correct.
volunteered to go. I don't know how that
Right.
conversation went down. He pardoned the 23 pro-lifers who were in jail because of Biden's DOJ. He threw his support behind the Born Alive bill that's been
Correct.
just got passed, I believe.
That's
And he withdrew from the World Health Organization and then re-signed the Geneva Convention. Did I miss anything?
declaration. Nope. And there are, I mean, other things are being done that,
Mhm. Oh, that's just
but those are just the ones that I've been picking up. And when I look at all that, and you're going, no, you go, because that's a mouthful.
yeah.
And they're all still being unpacked. Matter of fact, the bishops themselves have come out with a Geneva Declaration
Mhm.
thanking the president for re-signing that.
What is that?
So this is dealing with, with parental rights. It's supporting the family,
Okay.
and it's recognizing the dignity of human life, the
Mhm.
support of life, and advocating for those policies and programs within government that will support
And it
this.
says there's no right to abortion, I
There
believe,
is no
right?
right to abortion. And so what's happening, and so the bishops themselves, U.S. bishops,
Mhm.
have spoken on some of the issues that are already being you mentioned. This is one of them. And it's great to hear because people see the great good in this. And
Mhm.
so I think there are 40 nations now that
Mhm.
are part of that declaration.
Mhm.
So unfortunately, Biden, rescinded our participation in that. President resigned us back into this.
Oh, and then also I was listening to part of RFK Jr., Bobby Kennedy's, hearing today, and they were talking about Title 10, and I don't know anything about that, but I know that whatever Trump wants to do is what he did last time, and it's positive for pro-lifers regarding
Correct.
that. And then, respecting conscience, and
Right.
then he asked Bobby to investigate the safety of the abortion pill. So not just accepting on face value what the quote unquote science says
Right.
about it being safe, but actually asking him to go and investigate like
Correct.
what is the safety of this? What require and I'm guessing should women have to go to their doctor? Should they be able to be prescribed at telemed? Like, I'm guessing
right,
getting into that
right,
whole kettle of fish, which obviously pro-lifers are
exactly.
very concerned about.
Well, this goes back to what we started with, and that is how are things, just tied? How are they woven into other things? We
Mhm,
talked about Title X here. We talked about the Equality Act here. We talked about how that's tied into Obamacare. So you can see
mhm,
how things are all, and rightfully so in many ways, things should be
mhm,
woven together because you want to make sure that whatever the policy is that's affecting education is affecting education on all the other levels. So, but you can see how when something is really bad,
mhm,
how it gets woven in, and sometimes you don't know it's there. And so we could be saying, okay, we're going to pull it from here, but no one pays attention to what's happened over here. So what's happening now is very intentional, is looking at how is it woven?
mhm.
Where does it go to? Where else is it linked? Who else is being supported here? So by looking at all this, now look,
It's a mess.
it is a mess, and I think when we look at the issues of how big this mess is, and so right now when you have parents who for the last 4 years under the Biden administration were so threatened,
Mhm,
to stand up against this huge narrative that was being supported by legacy media,
mhm,
hidden from the general eye, because if you didn't speak the narrative, they just silenced you,
mhm,
prosecuted you, weaponized, used the government to put in this illegal lawfare against people. So parents had no place to go to defend their own parental rights and defend their children from being part of this great experiment that
mhm,
we've been seeing with the whole gender dysphoria and the whole mutilating surgeries. Then, if you promote the science, like the Catholic Medical Association and many others, on
mhm,
the abortion pill reversal, which is scientifically proven
mhm,
that it does happen and does work. But again, the legacy media, oh, no, can't have that narrative out there. So we're going to just silence everybody and basically demoralize anyone that promotes anything good like that.
mhm.
And so now people are, in a sense, are breathing, and you're watching it. You're watching
Mhm.
people, even people who are not with us, right?
Yeah.
On the far left, having to admit something. Now, they're not with us, and I'm not going to pretend they are, right? But to see people recognizing there's a shift in wind here,
Mhm.
and if we don't do something, we're going to be left outside. And there are already people paying the consequence for being, part of this great lie.
Mhm.
And so now we need to have bring all that into the light.
Mhm.
And really, when you have International Planned Parenthood, Planned Parenthood Federation America, and many other groups that are receiving funding, that
Mhm.
are actually working against the very principles that we adhere to and what we believe are the right things for human flourishing,
Mhm.
it's time for us to purge.
Mhm.
And again, the left and the progressive mindset is not just going to roll over and go away. They're going to fight for what they have. So we got to pray for the perseverance of those in these positions.
Yes, for sure.
So
Yeah, pray for
so it
President Trump
and
and
that's a
everyone else.
long way of looking at all those things, but
Yeah,
but I look at each one of those and see it on the international spectrum,
yeah.
because what happens in our country happens around the world, because
Mhm.
the world looks at what has happened in the United States, good or bad.
Mhm.
And so, as I mentioned earlier, about some of the very things that the United States advocates for globally are very good. And we want the good to
Mhm.
continue to grow. Absolutely. We are one of the most charitable countries around the world. We are very generous and very caring and responsive to the needs of people. Unfortunately, in some cases, we've tied very bad things to that aid, which Pope Francis has condemned, Pope Benedict condemned, John Paul himself condemned, and we're all of us who are in this great work also have condemned. These things are wrong. We should not be linking charity to immoral behavior or the advocating for immoral behavior. This is ridiculous,
Mhm.
and so that needs to be exposed. But it's good to hear, because the people globally are looking at this and saying, we might be able to come out from the shadow of this now, because when you have millions and millions of dollars being funneled into these other countries, coming through the agencies that the United States is funding through
Yeah.
our taxpayer money,
International Planned Parenthood, Marie Stopes International, and
exactly,
all the other
all the other
anti-life,
groups
anti-family organizations.
and depopulation groups. This is what we're talking about. So when you see, and these countries are saying, okay, finally, if we can defund these, and these people will disappear, But then we have to be ready, and this is what I'm hoping the president will do, is now what could we do with those funds that now we were spending in this very bad way?
Mhm.
How could we now maybe then through a very, very transparent process
Mhm.
of evaluations, grant countries, grant organizations to actually provide good things for people. So, for example, like malaria nets, you
Mhm.
know, I mean, we don't have time. The story after story where I'm seeing agencies promoting malaria nets. Look, very important, right,
Mhm.
to have those, and but connected to sexual reproductive health.
That's
What
so
does a
weird.
malaria net have to do with sexual reproductive health, i.e., contraception, abortion, sterilization? What does that have to do with it? So,
Yeah.
but yet that's exactly what's happened. So to pull those apart, clean water, water wells, educational facilities, good hospitals, good clinics, we can do a lot of good, and
Mhm.
I can tell you, think about, what we can do with $17 billion. Groups around the world that are really doing great things, what
Mhm.
that money could do that we as a country would be so proud to support.
Yeah.
So and have other countries be proud of us. They don't think well of us,
No.
Colleen, and it's very sad. And having been in 92 countries and having seen with my own eyes, I can see why they're not proud of us
Mhm.
because I've seen the harm we've done, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, and the US can't just go and make a mess worldwide and then walk away and say, clean it up on your own.
right,
Like, that's basically for 50 years, we've been funding depopulation
right,
in Latin America and Africa and Asia.
right,
And it seems irresponsible that the US could just turn its back now. And yes, it's good to cut off the funding, but then to just kind of be like, okay, deal with it.
right,
Even if it's, and I mean, there's a legitimate debate about how much of that should be tax dollars, how much should that be American citizens funding charities on
right,
their own accord. Like, and that's all a legitimate debate. But I do think that there is something to be said for the fact that because American tax dollars have been responsible for so much of this, Americans do need to step up and show like compassion towards the people that their tax dollars have wrecked.
right. And also it goes back to what we started talking about a little bit earlier was
Mhm.
the NSMM 200, the National
Yes.
Security Study Memorandum 200. People really need to be familiar with this because
Mhm.
it is what governs our state policy on the issue of depopulation.
Mhm.
And it has a very specific goal and very specific intent and rationale behind it. And ever since that document was promulgated on what's called the Kissinger Report, most people would
Mhm.
know it by that name probably,
Mhm.
and is it's still here. And it's still governing our state departments. It's still governing the way that we approach various countries, and this all needs that was declassified.
Mhm.
It's a public document, very clear, and but yet we see the consequence of this.
Mhm.
This to me ties perfectly in to
Yes.
the Mexico City policy, the Hyde Amendment, all the other things that are being brought up.
Mhm.
Would be overjoyed to see this be elevated in conversation and that maybe the Secretary of State's office to be charged, or the Department of Justice, whoever would be dealing with this particular area, Secretary of State's office would sound like the more appropriate one. Where is this document now? How has it now been pulled apart and woven in?
Because if it's never been rescinded, then it's still technically official policy,
Exactly.
even if people don't
Exactly.
realize it.
Because what people don't understand why it's called a national study, is a security study,
Mhm.
because part of what Kissinger did is tied it to national security.
Mhm.
This was the language that he was so successful in being able to co-opt. But when
Mhm.
you think about it, we do have, I mean, from a positive side, there is a sense of national security. There is
Mhm.
a sense of that. We must be aware of that. But to use what Kissinger did and link it to depopulation, this is where we see all of the immorality and we see all of the great harms and all of the injustices done.
Mhm.
And obviously, we when Roe was overturned, we undid a very grave injustice against the preborn. But the injustice is still there because we still have this happening in our some
Mhm.
states, and we still have it being advocated for around the world. Well, now this president has said enough to what's going on around the world. We're not going to fund that. All
Mhm.
right. So, but I want to move that policy to a law. And I can tell you, Colleen, I've had conversations with U.S. senators and U.S. congressmen over the
Mhm.
years about this, and there's not been, at least in their opinion, at that given moment of time when we had the conversation, that they felt there was enough support to move that conversation forward.
Mhm.
I believe in this pivotal moment, there is opportunity.
Yes.
There's a tremendous opportunity to move this from a policy that will shift with the wind of the new presidency
Mhm.
to a law of our land, and to really protect us as citizens from our funding being used to advocate for great evil and great harm to other people.
Well, and even from Trump's like America First standpoint of saying like I want to like know where our tax dollars are going, and Americans can't fund willy nilly everything around the world with our tax dollars, or shouldn't be. It seems like it's reasonable. You could make an argument to him purely based on that, saying we shouldn't fund condoms in Gaza, we shouldn't fund birth control in Malawi, we shouldn't
Right,
fund like yes, at HLI, we're concerned about the moral aspect as well as the physical aspect, but like you don't need Trump doesn't need to condemn contraception as a moral evil to stop funding it. You can
right,
just say this is a waste of our tax dollars. We shouldn't
right.
be like holding down the population
Right.
in other
Well, the
countries.
National Study Security Memorandum, because it's so tied in,
Mhm.
I'm going to quote, and I've done it many times, Emil Hagamu, our
Mhm.
director for our English speaking part of Africa that we
Mhm.
work in. Condoms does not create clean roads, clean water, good roads, healthcare, schools, anything. So the idea is that this does nothing but make larger families into smaller, poorer families.
Mhm.
It does very little to improve the standard of living among
Mhm.
people. Education, infrastructure, formation, all the various things that are
Mhm.
needed within a given society that can help itself to flourish and to grow. This is where we as a country can be of help. And we have been of help over the centuries in this kind of way, in a positive way.
Mhm.
We need to return to those principles. And what I said in my columns of the last few weeks really is, and even talking about the March for Life that we talked about, is that we are advancing at HLI and as a Catholic Church, as a Christian people, and people of goodwill.
Mhm.
We have a different vision of our society. And this is a moment where we're saying this is the vision we have. We believe in a moral society. We believe in marriage between one man and one woman, and that children are better and best raised by their own parents.
Mhm.
Parents are the primary educators of their children. They're the ones that know best for their children. And so we should not be assaulting families and parental rights. We need to create an environment where lowering of taxes, greater incentives for family life, to be able to encourage families to be open to welcoming life. It's interesting. J.D. Vance speaks about, wanting to see more children in the United States. And I've seen the left take it apart and, talk about it from a negative point of view. But there's nothing negative in the sense of promoting the beauty and openness to human life. And all we got to do is step back in time in this country and realize our prosperity came when we were a nation where family was truly the foundation of our society, where parents were stayed faithful to each other in a lifelong marriage, where children were being raised in that environment, children were welcomed. We blossomed as a country, and we can return and should return to those core values.
Mhm.
To advocate for that kind of vision where every life, from the moment of fertilization, the moment that life begins, is protected
Mhm.
under the law, as it always has been, as our Constitution has always stated, the right to life,
Mhm.
right? The pursuit of happiness, and this is something so important, and we're depriving over 1 million little boys and girls by procured abortion in 2023 died at the hands of an act chosen by their mother. And no, and this is something that's criminal on every level. We need to change that. We don't. That's not the vision we want for our country. Our elderly are being victimized today by the euthanasia mindset,
Mhm.
the complete other spectrum of abortion. Basically, if we're not going to accept life at the beginning, how are we going to treat life at the end? If we commodify life and make life nothing more than pragmatic and utilitarian, this is what we're going to get. We don't believe in that. So we have a different vision. And this is the vision that I hear resonating through many of these documents.
Mhm.
And it may not be the main motivation, in a sense, because I can't read intent, but
Mhm.
I can read content. And that content tells me something.
Mhm.
And to see people rallying behind that, Colleen, is very, very important. So I believe this is a very important moment. These next few months, this next year is going to be critical, for us as a nation. And like I said, it's not going to be pleasant. It's going to be very painful, and we're going to see a lot of infighting happening. There's going to be people that are going to say you're going too far. Some people say you're not going far enough. I really believe that we just need to really keep that larger vision.
Yeah.
What do we believe we are as a people? And if I could, I would say people need to go back and read, a little bit of Ronald Reagan about the city on a hill and his reflection on his last speech to the nation. It's very beautiful in a reflection, and to really go back and read Henry Hyde, who gave us the Hyde Amendment under the Reagan era, and to read his what I call the final prayer. He's
Mhm.
looking at the end of life and how this man who gave us this amendment, who realized the great harm of abortion, the mindset of abortion, what does it do to our nation? What does it do to our people when we advocate for such a thing? And that's why we should protect the conscience rights of our people that don't advocate for this, don't want this. It should not be normalized. So that's a different vision, Colleen. And so I'm being very passionate right now because it's just
No, it's good.
it's a great moment to be in and to see the opportunity that is here.
It was funny, one of our coworkers here was saying the other day, she's like, "I don't think I've ever woken up excited to see what the government did yesterday or
Right,
overnight."
right,
And it's
right,
so true. It feels like
right,
every day there's this new thing that it's like, "I didn't know you could sign an executive order saying there's only 2 sexes, but
right,
yay, I'm
right.
so glad he did."
Exactly.
And
And to hear the
it's
Speaker of the
been
House,
yeah.
to hear, the majority leader of the Senate, to hear them speaking
Mhm,
the same language. And I think in many ways, people have been so afraid to speak.
mhm.
Not saying these gentlemen and these ladies that have been speaking out, they've
Mm-mm.
always done so. But to have others,
Yeah.
kind of come out from behind the little shadow because you're afraid of being pounced
It
on.
feels like families are moving back to the center of the conversation.
Right,
Whether or not preborn children are moving back to the center of the conversation, like, that's
right,
obviously something people had concerns about before the election, and I think some people still do, although I feel like
correct,
Trump is obviously showing his commitment to at least some
right,
aspects of the pro-life cause. Um, but it does feel like families are moving to the center of the conversation. You saw
right,
JD's kids, you see Bobby Kennedy saying that he wants to, like, help protect children from health problems. You see,
right.
like, children and family being something that everybody in Trump's administration wants to protect, and obviously, as pro-lifers, we know that that is pro-life from the moment of fertilization all the way to natural
Exactly,
death, but it there is a narrative shift. There's
exactly.
definitely a narrative shift
And
here.
the same thing with education. I
Mhm,
mean, we know they're looking at the whole issue of education,
mhm,
and President Trump has been very clear in this. And this is not something new.
mhm.
This has been discussed many times. But to have it, people now begin to start looking at it. Okay, what is what should be our approach here? And
I
what we've done, as we've talked about before. I mean to cut you off there,
no,
but
you're good.
I'll return back to you. Is that parents are the primary educators of their
Mhm,
children, not just in the issues of faith,
yeah,
right? They're the ones that should be the ones that determine, the role of government is to assist families. And yes, as we've talked about before, government has a role here to play, and it has because we are citizens of this country,
mhm,
and it has a role to play, a very important role, but it should not supplant the family or replace the family. And in the narrative of several decades now has been basically parents being pushed out of the conversation, and school boards and
mhm.
principals and administrations making decisions that they don't have a right to make.
Well, and to that end, I also heard a rumor that I think today Trump was expected to sign an executive order, I think it was withholding funding of school from schools that promote gender ideology. So,
Right,
we'll know hopefully when this podcast
right.
come out whether or not he actually did that, but that was something that I saw, a rumor that I
Yeah.
heard this morning.
Well, I
So,
mean, obviously, there's hundreds of EOs that are occurring, executive orders,
yeah.
and more to come. But and many of them probably won't survive the time. But what's wonderful about this is basically, I think it's just important. He believes in them. He
Mhm,
wouldn't put his name on them. But first of all, secondly, but the idea is that you're tossing things that need to be addressed,
mhm,
and basically drawn a line in the sand.
yes.
And so now we have to pray for all of the congressional leaders. We
Mhm,
have to pray for those on the both house in the House and the Senate
mhm,
to have the courage and stop making ideologies the
mhm.
issue, but the well-being of our country and the well-being of our
And
families.
also to put some of this into law, because some of the detransitioners on Twitter were talking about this, about how, yes, this executive order is great, that you're ending, like, quote, unquote,
Right,
"gender affirming care" for children. But if you get someone like Biden in as the next president, then they're just
right,
gonna turn around and
right.
write a
That's
new
right.
executive order. And so just the importance of not just becoming complacent with all
Right.
of this great stuff that Trump is doing, but now holding lawmakers accountable, saying, "Put this
Follow
into
through.
law. Put
Right,
this into law. You're giving our children a reprieve for
right.
4 years." sign this into law and protect children going
Exactly.
forward.
And
And
here it's important, for people to be looking at, the much many people on the far left and the progressive mindset talk about being people of science. Well, they're not. And and so here, we have tremendous studies, documentation on these issues and many
mhm,
others. And so here it's been driven by an ideology.
mhm,
It's been driven by a mindset that we've talked about here before, the whole principles of the sexual revolution, but
mhm,
this has been one huge experiment.
yes,
The whole abortion issue, contraception issue, now the whole issue of gender dysphoria,
mhm,
and the whole many others that are forthcoming. These, it's enough. The
yeah,
experiment is done, and it's failed. It's been one huge failure,
yeah,
and so now there's a moment, and I'm with you on that, and what others are saying,
mhm,
as with the Mexico City policy, we already have the Hyde Amendment. You
mhm,
know, maybe it needs to be strengthened. Maybe the language needs to be tightened. But we have something already in law that helps govern our domestic policies.
mhm,
We have a policy that governs how we approach international approach on the issue of funding of abortion and programs that surround it. That needs to be, as you just said, no longer a policy. But
mhm,
that's going to take, and we already know. Look at what happened with the Born Alive
mhm,
Survivors Act. Okay. Now, you brought it up a little while ago, so something could have happened today that I haven't seen yet. But we know that just recently, the Democrats voted against it.
mhm.
All right, and so then, and because the Republicans needed 60, which we don't have 60,
Oh,
it did not pass. But what it does is it make it what the great Senate leaders did and the House leaders did. So
mhm,
Thune and
Johnson,
Johnson did is it made people vote.
yeah,
It made them come into the light. What's
yeah,
your position on this? And that's why President Trump came out and said,
mhm.
"This makes no sense." And that's why you've seen people address.
I thought it passed I guess it must have passed the House is what I heard, and then
It
the Senate is where it
right,
filibustered.
correct,
Okay,
right.
that's why I said it
There's a
passed because I
word that they
remember hearing
use, and
that
I
it
never pronounce it correctly, that that's what the 60 would have represented.
filibuster.
So it needed but
Yeah,
obviously it wasn't going to get that under the current moment
mhm,
unless some Democrats came over to that side. But what it did is it put it back in the light. So we're going to hear, and for our listeners who are not familiar with what we're talking about an abortion that has been performed, all right, that's failed. Basically, the child has survived the
mhm,
attack on its life. And then what happens is that, but that child, because the mother has determined that she doesn't want this child, abortion was the act that she has chosen to terminate the life of that child, that the child can be left to die.
mhm,
So what this act would have done is saying no. The child survived this violent crime against its life. Now you must take care of this life.
mhm,
You cannot let this child just die. And
yeah,
this is what this bill, or this was being pushed to uphold taking care of that little life. And so it failed. This to me is again something very serious, and it's telling of our nation where it is, how
it
sad it is.
it's also just, like, so weird in our nation's laws because it's like, okay, they allow abortion, and then I believe there's a federal ban on partial birth abortion, but then if the child makes it all the way out of the mother, then you can let it die. Like,
Right,
it's just
right,
it even from, like,
right.
the, like, liberal mindset of, like, there's a place where you can draw a line, like, it doesn't
Right.
make
No, it
sense.
doesn't. It doesn't. But the understanding is, I mean, it's just I mean, is this what we want our nation? This is what I mean, not only is abortion itself a heinous crime against the dignity of life,
Mhm,
against an innocent human child, and because someone of greater power, in this
mhm,
case, a mother, a father, decision maker, whoever that person is, has a greater power over that
mhm,
innocent child who has no voice, no ability to defend itself, that arbitrarily someone says, today I want, tomorrow I don't want. I
mhm,
don't want means I can kill you
mhm.
under certain state laws now. All right. And so the basically, but if a botched abortion occurs and that baby survives, now they're being told that baby, you can't do anything to take care of that child. This is ridiculous. So this is something
I
that,
think they can do something to take care of the child, they're
well,
just not required
right,
to.
not required by
Yeah,
the law. And so in this situation, and then it creates a whole issue that the mother didn't want the child. So now what happens to this child? There's so many things going on.
yeah.
But go back to my moral vision, not mine, our moral vision. Is that what we're going to be identified by? Now, I don't care if it's only one, two, five, 10, a dozen. One is too many for that to occur to. And that should not be what identifies. Abortion is a stain upon our country.
Mhm.
It's a stain upon the world.
Yes.
And and this is something that we just can no longer tolerate. So among all the things being dealt, as I said, we it's so much that we're
Yeah.
talking about. But again, just the passion about this is to be able to be in this moment at this time with the opportunity in front of us, with the conditions that we have. We have a very wonderful chance
Mhm.
to make some strong inroads where we can put into law, where we can create real programs that support. And I'm going to toss it back to you, but I'm going to give one last little comment on this, and that would be 30 years, right? And these numbers can move a little bit in a sense, but just say $17 billion
Mhm.
that Planned Parenthood Federation of America has received from our taxpayer money in 30 years, right? And so at least that's what we see from the 990s.
Mhm.
Could be other ways of getting funding, and they are. But the understanding, think about what we could do with that money to support pregnancy care centers, maternity facilities for moms and families in need, what we could be doing to help education in areas where women and mothers are in need of support and care,
Mhm.
and on many other layers of need. And I mean, life changing, radically life changing. And
Mhm.
instead of reaching for abortion as the answer, which is never the answer,
Mhm.
they would be reaching for ways to serve, to care, to protect, to defend, and to advance.
Mhm.
That is, it's life changing, and that's that back to that vision. So I'm that's been my prayer, and it continues to remain my prayer that we could see this. That
Yeah.
that I ask the Lord in prayer, Lord, not because I want to see it,
Mhm.
but I want to see in my own lifetime to see us move from such great evil to the service of human life,
Yeah.
whether at its beginning, the preeminent issue, at the end, and everything in between. Because what's not being talked about yet, which I know is coming in, are the human trafficking issues,
Yeah.
the whole pornography industry, right? The other assaults to human life that are out there,
Mhm.
right? So a lot to go, a lot to happen.
Yeah. Well, I do want to wrap this up, but I do have a quick question of something I didn't super understand. Trump had an executive order talking about the enforcing of the Hyde Amendment. Was that just basically that the Biden administration was kind of pushing the boundaries on the Hyde Amendment and then Trump was trying to draw it back in?
Right. Well, I'll get into my article a little bit, and that's in a sense when you look at y- y- the way that you like the website
Yeah.
that Trump put it into,
Mhm.
that Biden had created right after the overturning of Roe. So what happened was basically that by trying to get other agencies, it's okay, since we can't have abortion this way,
Mhm.
funding or advocating for, let's try it this way. So basically, just trying to funnel money in different directions and creating other agencies to do
Okay.
so, whether that be through the Health and Human Services
Mhm.
agency, whether that had been through the, Title X, whether that had been through the Educational Act, whether it had been through the Obamacare,
I think
find
that
other
he was
ways.
trying to quote unquote like expand abortion access on
Exactly.
military bases too was
That's
part of it.
correct.
So,
So
okay.
by looking at the Hyde Amendment, like we said in the
Mhm.
beginning, addresses domestic quote use of federal funding. So what Trump has done is because he's unlinking, if you will,
Mhm.
taking apart what Biden's administration did,
Mhm.
and also to expose it.
Yeah.
This is how the Biden administration ignored the law,
Yeah.
or tried to circumvent the law,
Mhm.
or tried to where they could be right on the edge of the knife in
Mhm.
adherence to the law, but so he's just brought it out and said, no,
No.
this is not what the Hyde Amendment says.
Okay.
And that's why it's important to look at those two initial acts,
Mhm.
in the sense of the reinstating of the Mexico City policy,
Mhm.
and then coming back and then addressing not only how that policy affects international governing, funding, grants, and so forth, but also looking at the Hyde Amendment and how the same granting process occurs domestically,
Yeah.
and how also are we following the Hyde Amendment in regard to our ways of funding agencies and other groups. So it's very detailed,
Mhm.
and as you can tell, it's a lot of
So
things
much
to it,
here. Yeah.
but it's good for people to read. So I know you're going to give the links, you're going to give the
Mhm.
connections. If people turn to my article on Monday,
Mhm.
I just want to warn you now, it's longer than it normally is because there's so
It
much.
was good though.
It's
I,
so
like,
much.
was reading through the draft that you gave me, and it
Yeah.
was, like, really helpful for me. I was literally reading it being like, "I forgot that he did this. It's been, like, 8 days. I forgot some of the things
Right.
he's already done."
And
So,
and really
just
by Monday, by the time it gets published, other things will have changed. But that's
Yeah.
okay. That's
Yes.
okay. But there's enough links in there for
Mhm.
those that really want to go back and read.
Mhm.
And what I did purposely is I connected people directly to the executive order,
Mhm.
or connected people to what did Speaker Johnson really say. So, because many people, you're hearing it and they're
Mhm.
typing, and sometimes you hear something and you're transcribing it,
Yeah.
but it's his, the Speaker of the House own
Mhm.
communications office
Mhm.
published, Senator Thune. So I'm connecting people as much as I could
To
to the
primary
actual
sources.
source.
Yeah.
So they read what they said and look at what they
Not
said.
just what someone on Twitter said.
Exactly. And because even myself, sometimes I'm listening to audio
Yeah.
and watching it, and I'm trying to type as quick as I can because I just I can't go quick enough.
Yeah.
So sometimes I may transcribe something that's not perfectly true,
Yeah.
accurate, I should say. It's true because I meant to be true, but I might miss a word.
That's how I felt at the March for Life. I was trying to, like, write down the best quotes of the speakers, and I'd be like, "I
Yeah.
think I got that. I think I got the wording
Right.
correctly."
The good
So,
thing is those are on video, so that's a good
yes,
thing to go back to.
exactly. Okay, last question. Super quick answer, like, 30-second answer.
Oh, we'll
If you
try.
could ask Trump to do 5 things in his
Ah.
term, like, in the next year, what would they be?
Okay, so first of all would be NSSM 200.
Yes,
We need
rescind
to
it.
completely do it. Number two is we need to make the Mexico City policy a law of the land, right?
Okay.
Number three, we need to take funding away from people like Planned Parenthood and other agencies like United Nations Population Fund
Mhm,
and turn it toward good things that support families like maternity health care, maternity homes, pregnancy care centers and other groups that are supporting families in life.
mhm,
And then one more thing would be basically is to look at how we are funding the international market. So basically using the resource of the United States to really help developing nations with the resources they need to move out from a developing nation
mhm,
into a nation that really can be part of the larger global economic power
mhm.
and really have what they need. We have the power to do that.
Yeah, and I'm guessing auditing all those funds to make sure you're not sending it to organizations that are, like,
Right.
gonna be giving condoms to people who are in drought, which was,
Right.
I think, something they did in, I forget, it might have been Syria
Yeah.
or Sudan, one of those places. So, cool. Well, thank you,
I got
Father.
five.
Was that 5?
I think I got five.
I think it was 4 or 5, something like
Yeah, well,
that. Yeah, well, also to the rescinding NSSM 200 point that just occurred to me when we were talking about it earlier, is that there's been a lot of, people talking online about Trump declassifying the JFK, MLK, RFK files. And obviously, the Kissinger report is already declassified, but I think there would be a benefit if he rescinds it. It's going to make people look at it. And it's like there's so many things that he's doing that are coming up in the conversation. So even though this document is declassified and people could go read it, most people haven't heard about it. So if Trump comes out and
right,
says that this is not the policy of the land anymore, so many eyes are going to get turned towards it that they're going to realize what the US has been doing for 50 years. So I think that's a huge
right.
benefit of what he's doing as well. Is just
Exactly.
there's this interest of people who want to know what the government's been up to, and by
Right,
declassifying documents that's drawing attention and
right,
getting things talked about, and I think by rescinding already declassified documents
right.
is going to be another way to
And
draw
also
that
just,
attention.
Colleen, just final little point would be is for people, what are we really spending money on
Yeah.
as a nation? And again, we don't want to turn it completely into ourselves and only focus in on our self-interest alone.
Mhm.
Yes, we need to look at what we're doing domestically, what supports our country, what helps us flourish as a nation, as a people, as citizens, absolutely. But we also are a people part of a larger family.
Mhm.
And this is something that's always been very good about our country that I've always been very proud of is, and I travel now for this mission. And as I mentioned, 92 countries, I do see the good, the bad, and the ugly. I do see tremendous good. And I see the good of our country and what it does and has the power to do when
Mhm.
it advocates for true human flourishing, the true human good, the real support of what we as a Catholic Church would call the common good.
Mhm.
And we do this. We really do. And when I read Centesimus Annus and I read the documents of our church on social justice, there are many, many tremendous great things we as a people do. We ought to be proud of our nation. We do very good things. But this is a chance for us to look at all of that,
Mhm.
not to blow our own horn, not to be given some award, but if anything else, to be proud of who we are as Americans, to be proud of the good that we do, but
Mhm.
also to look at the things that we aren't shouldn't be proud of,
Yeah.
and how can we change that, and to realize how much waste are we really do we have
Mhm.
that is depriving us from doing greater good. And how much are we wasting on things that do not promote the good at all, that promote evil, like the taking of innocent human life, or that promote, sadly, not that we're promoting human trafficking, but by doing nothing about it, by,
Turning a blind eye to
right,
it. Yeah.
what are we doing? So, and how could we reallocate those funds in ways that really speak to our core principles as a nation, that most of us as a nation believe in? The percentages of elites and those in the progressive mindset, are we far outnumber them.
Mhm.
We've just been silent. We've been quiet. Can't be quiet anymore. We need to really speak out. So I am with you. This is a moment. This is a moment. And we may, I don't mean negative. I don't want to be a pessimist, but moments come and go. And, we might not have this moment again for whatever period.
Yeah.
This is the moment. So if I may use the scripture, this is the day now the Lord has made. When we speak, let us rejoice and be glad in it. This is the day we have. We have a moment. We have a period of time. We have a chance to look at all this. Let's not waste it.
Amen. Thank you, Father. This has
You're
been a
welcome.
great conversation. And I hope it was helpful for our audience just to hear us talking about what Trump has done and what we can hope for going forward. So
Amen.
thank you. And to all of our listeners, please like, subscribe, leave any comments of questions you have, things you want us to talk about in the future, any thoughts that you had on today's episode, and leave us a good review. Keep on living the culture of life. God bless.